Yes. Oh, are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'm ready. And shall I try to share my PowerPoint?
Okay. You can try to share your PowerPoint.
Do you see it?
Yes, okay.
Let me try slideshow mode.
Okay.
Do you see it?
Yeah. It's clear.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Okay. Before the class, let me open the class, Dr. Changzoo. Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay. Hello everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Dr. Nia, and good evening, Dr. Changzoo. I think it's already 7 p.m. yeah, on the New Zealand. Okay.
Yes, it is. Yeah, 7 p.m.
Sorry for disturbing your rest time. And thank you very much, Dr. Changzoo, for your willingness and kindness to be here. I am Mentari Anugrahimsa, and I'm a lecturer from Public Relations and Digital Communication. Today, I will be your moderator. I feel honored to be here because today we have great key speaker with great topics. Here with us now, Dr. Changzoo Song from the Auckland University, who will share materials about conflict and reconciliation in East Asia, especially in China, Japan, and Korea. Thank you, Dr. Changzoo, for coming to this course. And for your information, this course will be divided into 4 sections. Short opening, and then 80-minute materials or lecture from Dr. Changzoo, and then Q&A section, and then the last is short closing. Okay. Before we start the lecture, I will show or I will read the short biography from Dr. Changzoo. Dr. Changzoo, can you share screen first, please? We need to show your CV.
Oh, so sorry, because you still echo, so I didn't hear it very well. So what shall I do? So did you say I stop sharing or?
Distinction. One of them is Hangul Award from Ministry of Culture, Tourism and Sport from Republic of Korea, and then he has interest in nationalism of Korea and Korea diaspora. And then Dr. Changzoo is active as well in writing articles. He already published many articles and also book. Maybe if you want to read some of his article, you can search in his Google Scholar. Okay. Okay, Dr. Changzoo, so it is a good opportunity for us to learn more about Dr. Changzoo, from Dr. Changzoo, sorry. Okay, without further ado, let's we welcome Dr. Changzoo Song. The time is yours, Dr. Changzoo. Selamat siang. Oh. Just call me Mentari, doctor. It's okay. I think you should do it again to reshare your screen. Yeah, we can see it. Okay.
Define here first China and Mongolia here, Korea, outside it, Korea, Australia, and Japan. And it includes other countries, which is Taiwan, which China doesn't consider it as a sovereign nation, but is actually a sovereign nation. So this is East Asia. And East Asia, of course, every part of the world is important, and especially here in Indonesia as well. But East Asia has some peculiarities in a sense that countries here have very, very long history. And they were always important in global history, but particularly after 20th century, these countries, this area became very important. But before we start to talk about East Asia, I want to briefly compare Asia and Europe. Of course, you would know that what Europe is and what Asia is, but Europe here, when we think about Europe, Europe is a very, very homogeneous continent. Of course, in Europe, there is a Portugal, Spain, and France, and UK, and Netherlands, Germany, Poland, and Russia here. Okay? So it looks very diverse, but when we compare Europe with Asia, Europe is a very homogeneous continent compared to Asia. For example, let's talk about religion. In Europe, how many religions are there? Basically, there is only one religion, we can say, in very simple term. Why? Because, of course, in Europe, there is a Catholicism and Protestant Christianity, and also Islam, and also Judaism, and so on. But all these nations, they believe in just one God. This is the same God, different name. Maybe Jehovah, or God, or Allah. The names are different, but Europeans basically believe in only one God. So religiously, it's extremely homogeneous. But when we come to Asia, of course, in Indonesia, the Muslims are the great majority, and also Malaysia as well. But there is a Buddhism and Hinduism and Shintoism and Confucianism, Taoism and Shamanism. All kinds of religions are here, and some countries in Asia are very Christian. And which countries are very Christian? Of course, part of Indonesia, there are some Christians, like Batak people and so on, but the Philippines is a very Catholic, and Vietnam, to a certain degree, Catholic, and South Korea is also a very Christian country, where about 23% of Koreans say that they are Christians. Okay? Now, when we talk about language, of course, in Europe, there are all kinds of languages, Portuguese, Spanish, and English, and French, and German, Swedish, Norwegian, and so on and so on. But most Europeans, they speak only one language, as a matter of fact. Why? Because all these languages belong one language family, which is called Indo-European language family. Of course, there are exceptions. Finland and Estonia and Hungary, they speak not European language, but they are more Asiatic language. When we come to Asia, now, linguistically, Asians are extremely diverse. Even in Indonesia alone, there are how many different languages are there? Not to mention Papua New Guinea. And also Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Korean, and Japanese, Chinese. By the way, many people tend to think Korean and Japanese and Chinese languages are very similar to each other. No, I will tell you later. Yeah? And now, finally, let's also talk about food. The Europeans, what do they eat? Of course, they eat diverse food like French and German and Russian and so on. But if we really look at what Europeans eat, it's a very, very homogeneous. They eat bread, salad, meat. And not only what they eat, but also, and potato, of course, also how do they eat? They use all same utensils, fork and knife. Okay? But when it comes to Asia, Asians, not only Asian food is so drastically different from each other. Like, for example, Japanese food and Indian food, and Indonesian food, they are very different. So different. Not only that, the way how people eat is also extremely diverse in Asia. As we will talk very soon, East Asia, how do people eat? They use chopstick. But not all Asians use chopstick, of course. Chopstick is in East Asia, but as you move from east to west, here, chopstick ends in Vietnam. And further to the west of Vietnam, you don't see chopstick, because their people have a much better tool to use, which is a finger, right? Which is great. So very swiftly people eat their food with a finger. And now, of course, it's the same in India. But as we go further west, then fork and knife begins. Okay, so this is a very quick introduction that how we know Europe compared to Asia, Europe is extremely homogeneous. And compared to Europe, Asia is just extremely diverse. Even the way how people look. Here in Indonesia, you have such a diverse people. They look different, the skin color different, and so on. But when we come to East Asia, most people look like me. Okay? So it's impossible to tell the Japanese from Koreans or Koreans from Chinese, it's impossible. And that's why many, I think it was more than 30 years ago when I was in America, places like California or Hawaii, we tend to have a lot of Asians. And Indonesians, when they come to California or Hawaii, they're surprised. And they say, oh, mengapa banyak orang Cina? So from Indonesian perspective, all the Asians, they look like orang Cina. So, but actually no. Actually, orang Cina is a minority, but in those days there were more Koreans and more Japanese and so on. Okay? But anyway, in Europe, everyone looks the same almost. The hair color, eye color, and skin color. Okay, so Europe is very homogeneous. Asia is extremely diverse. That's why we have to divide Asia into, well, at least 4 Asia. So one is East Asia, and then further south, Southeast Asia, the ASEAN countries, and then South Asia is different, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and these countries have their own commonality in terms of religion and tradition. And then we have a Central Asia, all the stans, like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan, and so on. Okay, so there is one Europe, but in Asia there are 4 Asias. All right, so that is our basic understanding. Now, when you come to East Asia, as I said, people all look alike. Nevertheless, this is in China, the city of Changzoo in Sichuan, about 10 years ago. Now Chinese are angry and they came out to the street with the Chinese flag. And why they come to the street? Because there is a territorial dispute over one small island, which Chinese call Daoyuan and Japanese call Senkaku. Okay, so now it is occupied, and Japan owns that small island at the moment. Okay, but Chinese believe that is their island. So whenever there is the people are provoked, then they come to the streets with great anger. And also, as you see, what they say is also amazing. Here, what do they say? It is the Japanese dogs. Okay, oh gosh, they call Japanese as dogs. And also in Taiwan as well. And well, I can't read what this says. Okay, it's just too dirty to read. Okay, and what is this? Atomic bomb. Oh my goodness, they want to drop another atomic bomb to Japan. Japan is the only country in human history that was bombed with atomic bomb. And now they want to drop more atomic bomb in Japan. And you can see the level of hatred that Chinese have against Japan. And also, here, this is in Japan. Now, of course, Japanese people are also angry whenever China claims and try to provoke their territory, this is a Senkaku. Okay, and now this gentleman is wearing this. It says that this Senkaku Island, which is Chinese called Daoyuan, it is Japanese territory. Don't even think about it. Okay, that's what it says. Okay, now this is South Korea. In South Korea, Koreans are also extremely crazy and they torn apart this Japanese flag and they perform their anti-Japan sentiment. And here also, this was only 3-4 years ago, but no to Japan, no Abe Shinzo was prime minister at that time, and now he was assassinated, as we know, and so South Koreans. And also in Japan, of course, there is also a strong anti-Korean demonstration. And so you can say, you can see how much these East Asians, they hate each other. So that's the beginning of my lecture. And so we should understand why they hate each other. And also, what is the origin of this hatred? Okay? And then, of course, in the end, we will talk about what is the way to find reconciliation amongst these countries. Of course, conflict is not only in East Asia. I know that even in Indonesia is an extremely peaceful country, but Indonesians also have a conflict with the neighboring countries, of course with China, with maritime borders and things, but also even the cousins of Indonesians who are Malaysians over Pati. That's rather cute, but still Indonesians and Malaysians can fight over Pati. Okay? But anyway, compared to East Asian conflict, that is almost nothing. So please don't worry about it too much. So this is what we will talk about today. First of all, we will talk about the shared civilization and tradition in East Asia, the three countries, China, Korea, Japan, and how this the shared civilization and traditional relationship fundamentally changed when Western powers reached to East Asia by the mid-19th century. And in this turmoil, when Western countries come, as we will learn, that each country, China, Japan, Korea, they try to modernize themselves so that they would not be conquered by Westerners, as Indians were conquered by Britain, and very sadly, Indonesia was conquered by the Dutchies, and Vietnam by French, and so on. So East Asia was the last part of Asia that was not conquered by Western powers yet. So in this process, these countries, knowing what happened in India and Indonesia and Malaysia and other countries like Vietnam, East Asian countries, they try to modernize and industrialize their country to become powerful, like Western European countries, so that they would not have the same fate as other Asians. However, in that process, that is not an easy thing, and China failed, Korea failed, but Japan succeeded. And eventually Japan became the dominant power, not only in East Asia, but in entire Asia, and Japan would conquer Korea and China. And that's how this traditional relationship changed. And then after the war, what happened then? After the Pacific War, what happened to these three countries? Did they become friends again? No. And we will talk about that. And then in the end, we will think about the effect of victimhood, because all these countries, interestingly, they say we are the victims. So we will think about this victimhood and how it affects on international relationship. Okay? So after this talk today, you will have understood that how and why traditional relationship among China, Japan, Korea changed in the mid-19th century when Westerners came. And also how these three countries to try to build modern nation state, which eventually led them to totally different paths. And how they ended up with a strong sense of victimhood. Each country feel that they are victims. And then what are the effects of this sense of victimhood on the nation and international relations? So I hope that you will have understood this by the end of this lecture. Okay, so first of all, as I said, from a non-East Asian perspective, like from Indonesia, for example, that when you look at East Asians, they all look alike, right? And indeed, they look alike and they share same civilization, nearly for over 2,000 years, almost, okay? And what they share, not only they share materials, like instruments and machines and tools and so on, but also they share same idea as well, the same philosophy. But then, even though they were shared, each country developed their own way, and they also kept unique tradition of its own country. So here in this picture, you see the Japanese lady with traditional Japanese instrument, the shamisen, which came from Chinese, probably pipa. And here, Chinese lady playing the flute, and the Korean lady here playing the traditional Korean, the small drum, which normally they wear on their shoulder, and you can beat the drum, but at the same time you can dance. So these three countries, compared to European countries, again, they kept relatively peaceful relationship. Of course, there were big wars among China, Korea, Japan, but compared to European countries were always fighting. Okay? And First World War, Second World War, it was all Europeans who started. And even before that, 30 years war, 100 years war, and so Europeans were really, countries were fighting against each other. But East Asia, they were fighting, but compared to Europe, they kept relatively peaceful relationship. But again, as I said, this traditional international relationship would drastically change when Westerners reached to East Asia. By the way, so in this map again, the Westerners came from west, okay, from here. And they came first around Africa, but eventually they built Suez Canal, and they came from here. So that's why when Westerners come to Asia, the first country they encounter is India. And that's why India was conquered first. And then, of course, almost same time or even earlier, Dutch people came here and they reached Indonesia and they colonized most part of Indonesia. But Europeans came to China then, of course, the Southeast Asia and China, and they tried to trade with China, and they ended up having 2 opium wars led by Britain and France and so on. But here, these 2 countries, Korea and Japan, was relatively free from Western invasion yet. Okay? Now, here, because from European perspective, this is the end of Eurasian continent. Europe is the western end, and eastern end is Korea and Japan. So it was too far for Europeans to conquer. And also, not much things to exploit. In Indonesia, you have so many spices and natural resources and so on, but Japan and Korea, not much. Not only that, these countries, especially Japan, was relatively strong even before industrialization. And that's why Europeans, Western Europeans, did not come here until late 19th century. However, Europeans came from totally different direction, now from America. Americans began here in the East Coast, Boston, and then slowly they conquered Indians and they developing this country, and then they crossed the Rocky Mountain and they reached California here, and they built San Francisco and Los Angeles by mid 19th century. And then Americans started to come here to Asia, from here to San Francisco. When you come from San Francisco, you don't go the other way to reach Asia. You just go across the Pacific, and then the first city you arrive from here will be Tokyo. And that's why Tokyo, in the past, in ancient history, Tokyo was not a city, and it was a very new city relatively, and it was not important. The important part of Japan is all here in the west, where they have large cities. But anyway, so in late 19th century, Europeans came from two different directions to East Asia, to Japan and Korea. Okay? One is from west, but the other, more powerful power, came from America. But anyway, so that's the background. Now, we said East Asians, they share same civilization. So specifically what? All these countries, even today, they share Chinese writing system. Okay? So in Japanese, they use kanji, they call, and Koreans also, up to 70% of Korean vocabularies, they are based on the ancient Chinese writing system. Okay? And that's why in the old days, the three countries, the elite, when they met each other, they could communicate, not by speaking, but by writing Chinese character. Because Chinese character carries meaning, so you don't need to pronounce. Just by looking at it, you understand what it means. And that's why these three countries share the same writing system. However, linguistically, these three countries are totally different from each other. Chinese and Korean has nothing to share because they belong to totally different language family. Chinese belong to Sino-Tibetan language family group, while Korean and Japanese, they are totally unrelated to Chinese, and so linguists have a hard time where to categorize which category that Korean and Japanese belong. But now many linguists say both Korean and Japanese, they have a lot of similarities. However, they belong also independent group, so they are not really too closely related. Nevertheless, when Japanese try to learn Korean, it's relatively easy, and when Koreans try to learn Japanese, that's also quite easy. Why? Because these two languages, even though they are different, grammar is almost identical. So it doesn't take too long for these two peoples to learn each other's language. However, if you don't learn each other's language, then there's no way for you to understand. Okay? Now, so the writing system, they share China, Korea, Japan. And also, the wetland rice agriculture became the basis of the prosperity and cultural development throughout East Asia. Rice came sometime about maybe 3,000 years ago to Korea and Japan, and Chinese civilization it didn't begin with rice, because where Chinese civilization was born is northwest, where there is not much water, and this is along the river of Yellow River. And there, the Chinese people, their staple food was millet, very tiny little small grains, until wheat arrived. Then later, southern China, the rice started, but that was much later. And that's why, as we will understand very soon, that why these countries, they use different kinds of chopstick, and why some countries like Koreans use a spoon a lot, while Japanese and Chinese, they don't use a spoon. Okay? But anyway, so they share writing system, they share wetland rice agriculture, just like in Indonesia. And also, they all share the ancestor worship. When ancestors die, they build a small monument and they pray, and every year they prepare food and they worship their ancestors. And Indonesians also do, some Indonesians, and Vietnamese do, but some other parts of Indonesia, people don't do it, and so on. So it's different. And then also, another interesting thing for East Asia is soybean. Soybean today is globally consumed, but soybean originated somewhere, they say Korea actually, but anyway, this was a typical East Asian bean, out of which they made shoyu, the soy sauce, and also Japanese miso or Korean doenjang or the fermented Chinese sauce. Okay? And that's how tofu came. Okay? So, because soybean, you need the soybean to make a tofu. Or in Indonesia, you have, I forgot the name, but yeah, later, okay? But anyway, so soybean and chopstick, they share. Also, Buddhism, they share, because Buddhism was a dominant religion in old day. And then later, Confucianism became dominant philosophy and religion. And then also, because compared to Korea or Japan or Vietnam, because China is such a big country and powerful country, so other countries would show some respect to China. Okay? And then Chinese emperor, according to Confucian tradition, Chinese emperor tried to be nice to smaller countries. But anyway, of course, not all the time. But basically, that was the tributary system that worked in East Asia for a while. Okay, so now, as I said, the East Asians, they share chopstick. But chopstick, yes, they share, but each country's chopstick is very different. This is Chinese chopstick, by the way. It's very long, first of all, much longer than Koreans or Japanese, and it is made out of wood or bamboo, traditionally. And Japan also, it's very short, but the end is very sharp, sharper than Chinese or Korean one, and it's also made out of bamboo or wood. Koreans, meanwhile, they use metal. So interesting, Koreans, traditionally they use metal. Of course, these chopsticks came after East Asians started to grow wheat. Wheat, the grain wheat, you make what? Noodle. If you try to eat noodle with a spoon, that's very, very difficult. And that's why chopstick was invented to eat noodle. But also, soon the rice arrived. When rice came, because rice in Korea and Japan particularly, the Chinese rice is different. However, for Korean rice and Japanese rice, they are very sticky. They are short and sticky, not like Indonesian nasi. Indonesian nasi is similar to southern Chinese rice. Okay? But Korean and Japanese rice, very easy to eat with chopstick because they are sticky. So if you poke your chopstick into rice, and you can eat. Okay? But Indonesian rice, it's very difficult to use a chopstick because the rice doesn't stick to each other. Okay? But anyway, that's why before rice, first tool that everywhere, almost everywhere, people, the human race began to use was a spoon. Because spoon is easy to eat soup, but also small grains like a millet or nasi, you can use a spoon. So spoons were used by all East Asian countries, but gradually spoon disappeared from China and Japan. And that's why, as I said, because in China, the noodle doesn't make the spoon essential. And in Japan, the rice. But in Korea, somehow spoons alive. So when you go to Korean restaurant, they will always serve metal chopstick and spoon. Okay? While when you go Chinese restaurant, of course they give you small ceramic spoon or plastic spoon, but that's only for when you are served with the soup. And in Japan, probably only udon or ramen dish comes with a small spoon, but otherwise Japanese normally just use chopstick. Even soup, they use chopstick. Okay? So what I try to say is East Asians seems like they share same civilization, but they are very unique to each other. Okay? So as I said, looking similar, but also very different from each other. So I said language is very different, but each country has their own writing system now. So this is Japanese. They invented the hiragana and katakana in nearly 8th, 7th century already. And the Koreans, they invented the Hangul much later, 15th century. And until then, they were using the ancient classical Chinese. Now, these Chinese are using these characters, they are simplified. So people like me who studied classical Chinese, the writing system, very difficult for me to read. But if you bring a book printed 100 years ago in China or Japan, it's much easier for me to read. Right? But anyway, so language and writing systems, each country are totally different. And each country is today political tradition and contemporary political system different. China is a communist country, and but Japan and South Korea is democratic country, and North Korea is a communist country, and also religious today. In China, there was not much religion until recently because the Communist Party didn't like religion and they oppressed religion. However, that didn't happen too much in Korea and Japan. So in Korea particularly, Christianity is nearly 22%, 3%, and Buddhism 20%, and Catholicism about 5–10%, and so on. So Korea is a very diverse in religion today. In Japan, meanwhile, there are Buddhism. Buddhism is probably the most prominent religion in Japan, but Japanese also, not only they believe Buddhism, but they also practice Shintoism. And meanwhile, Christianity in Japan is very small, so only 1% of the entire population. And also the social manners and bowing are slightly different from each other. Okay, so now if we look at all the paintings, this is tigers, and in Indonesia you also have the tiger, but in the tigers in Southeast Asia is different from tigers in Korea and Manchuria because they are Siberian tiger. They are big, much bigger than the Indian tiger. Okay? So in Korea, this is Korean painting, this is Chinese, this is Japanese. In Korean painting, tigers were #1 source of killer. So a lot of people, human beings, were consumed by tiger in Korean history because there were so many tigers in Korea because Korea, like Japan, has a lot of mountains. But even though tiger kills people, the Koreans make it fun. So in this painting, the folklore painting, that tiger is smoking together with the rabbit. Okay, very interesting. And of course, this is a Manchu flag, and in Manchuria, of course, tiger is also very powerful symbol. But in Japan, this is Japanese tiger. However, there's no tiger in Japan. Okay, so Japanese, they only heard about tiger from Koreans, the neighboring country. So when maybe Koreans depicted tiger in a very ferocious manner, so Japanese tigers are the most ferocious tigers in painting. Right? So same animal, different perspective. And Chinese, traditional Chinese historical record, there are many paintings that depicted the diplomatic delegates coming from all over around China. So here, I think this is Arabic, and sorry, I can't see it. So this is, this is Japanese here. Okay, it says Japanese, and these are Koreans. This guy and this guy, they are from Korea. Because Korea was divided into 3 kingdoms in those days. So interesting that the Korean delegates wear shoes, but Japanese delegates did not wear shoes. So we can tell in all the days, this is during Tang Dynasty in China. So that was 7th, 8th century. And probably in all the days, the Japanese, the shoe wearing was not probably common in Japan. But anyway, so as I said, these 3 countries sharing so many things amongst themselves nearly for 2,000 years, they had some big wars, like Mongols invaded China many times, and sometimes Korea, and also Japan. Toyotomi Hideyoshi's army invaded Korea, and so on. There were big wars, of course. However, compared to Europe, much less wars, and especially for almost 300 years, from early 17th century and late 19th century, no wars. Very peaceful. Okay, so that's interesting. Now, however, this peaceful relationship changed when Western Europeans came, as I already mentioned. So, in the face of this invading the European powers, China, Korea, Japan, they all tried to modernize their own country, not to be conquered by Europeans, and Chinese tried very hard. And this is early 20th century and late 19th century. The Chinese, the Qing dynasty, they built factories to produce weapons. Okay? So looks like very well equipped. However, their way of understanding the West was the Westerners are barbarians, but we, even though our military is weaker than theirs, morally we are superior. That's how Chinese thought. Okay, so Chinese try to learn Western technology only, not Western ideas. So their way of modernization was not complete, and eventually it failed, and then Qing dynasty would collapse. Now, Joseon is the old name of Korea in those days. Joseon tried a little bit, but internally they were divided. The traditional elite, they stick to Confucian idea, while some new, a small number of new elite in Korea who accepted Christianity, they tried to change and modernize Korea, but they didn't have much power. The power was in the old elite, and so Korean modernization was not important, and eventually Korea would be colonized, conquered, and colonized by Japan. Okay? It was Japan, however, that succeeded. As a matter of fact, among the all non-Western countries in the whole world, Japan is the only exception that achieved successful modernization and industrialization by the end of 19th century, and that's why Japan rose as a very important power in global politics. So here, through major restoration and so on, the Japanese, they developed modern army and also modern industry to supply and to make weapons and so on, and Japan became very, very powerful country. And with this power, Japan was able to defend itself, but also the security of Japan would be endangered because of Korea and China. Because from Korea and China, Russians were coming from north, and Britain and France and so on, they were still trying to come from the west. Okay? So anyway, many things pushed Japan to become a very militaristic country, and eventually Japan became one of the Western colonial and imperialist country and started to conquer other Asian countries. Okay? So up to now, if we put these stories in a context, it is like this. Okay? The Japan's aggression in Korea and in China from late 19th and early 20th century until the end of the Second World War, 1945, that was viewed differently. From Korean perspective and Chinese perspective, Japan was invaders. But from Japan's perspective, the dominant discourse was the whole world was being conquered by Europeans. And Japan was the only country that was not conquered. Of course, Thailand was not conquered, but for different reasons. Okay? And Thailand, that was between the balance between the French and Britain. So they decided not to just leave Thailand without conquering it. But Japan was too powerful for any Western countries. That's why Japan survived. And Japanese, they thought that we have to survive. For us to survive, we need colonize other Asian countries. That's the Japanese perspective, okay? Especially because Japan has no natural resource, okay? But Japan had to compete with Americans and European powers, and so they need resource. That's what Japanese perspective is, okay? And so it's this discourse, of course, not 100% of Japanese accepted that, but some the minority Japanese, even 19th century and early 20th century, they thought Japan's invasion of Korea or China is no good, and Japan is now just the same as other colonial and imperial countries like UK or France and Germany or Netherlands. Okay? But anyway, from this dominant discourse, Japan tried to protect itself and Asia from the hand of invading Europeans. So Japan fought, but failed and bombed with atomic bomb, and that's how the war ended. Okay, so that's the context. Okay, and indeed, in early days of modern Japanese history, many Japanese people thought that we should help Koreans and Chinese to modernize themselves as we did, so that they can become strong, and when they become strong, they can be independent and they can stop the invasion of Westerners. Okay? However, later that changed, and very quickly Japan, that idea was abandoned, and now Japan behaved just like any imperial country. And Japan fought China in 1894-95. This was the first Sino-Japanese War. Now, this was the first big war Japan fought after after Meiji Restoration. After the war, now these are Chinese POWs, prisoners of war. And what are they doing? This is Japanese painting, because in those days, no camera. So painters painted, and this was official, the Japanese military painter painted. And so these Chinese, one by one, they will be brought here, and then the Japanese soldiers, they would cut their neck, their head, beheaded. And you see that, the fallen heads. Horrible, but also very interesting. Why? The war, Japan won the war. Why should they kill Chinese? Of course, there is a context that in particular battle in Dalian, that when Japan finally conquered Dalian, they found in Chinese military barracks, the Japanese soldiers, they found many Japanese POWs were mutilated. Their body was mutilated. They were beheaded, they were cut in hand and tortured and so on. And that's why they did it. Okay? But anyway, even during the Second World War, in Southeast Asia, especially when Singapore and Malaysia was conquered by Japanese troops, of course, a lot of soldiers there in British Army was Sikh Indians. And of course, Orang Belanda, or whatever, these Europeans. Okay? And here, the Sikh Indian soldiers serving in the British Army, when they were arrested, captured, now Japanese, they use human beings as a shooting target. So you see that they are killed. And also here, the POWs, they are beheaded. Very interesting, because by then, this Second World War, the most Western powers, they were observing this Geneva Convention about dealing with more humanitarian way of dealing with POWs. Right? But if we go back 1904, 1905, now this was 10 years after when Japan fought Russians. Interestingly, at that time, Japanese soldiers, they behaved extremely well. Here, because the Russians were defeated by Japan, Russian Navy, so a lot of people were rescued and they were put in hospital. So here, the Japanese nurses and Japanese military doctors, they are helping the wounded Russian soldiers. when they died, for each dead Russian soldier, the Japanese erected this monument. This is a cemetery in Shikoku that you can see it even today. So very interesting. Why Japan's behaved here in 1894, 10 years later, behaved this. And later, during the Second World War, behave like this. Very interesting. It is something to study. Right? Now, after the war, what happened? This is General Mekasa. From Japanese perspective, he is an enemy number one because he was leading the Allied troops, and I mean he was involved in this, atomic bombing as well. But after the war, this is General Mekasa, and this is Japanese then Emperor Hirohito. Actually, he was supposed to be put on trial, military trial, and he was probably supposed to be executed, but General Mekasa forgave him and he was left. And that's why in Japan we still have emperor. But emperor had to declare that I am not a god, I am a human being. Because until then, this Japanese state Shintoism considered emperor as highest god. And also, even today, there are several statues of General Mekasa in Japan. They are established by Japanese people. So after the war, Japan was born into a new nation, as a matter of fact. Now America is not enemy anymore. Okay? And now that was a trial in Tokyo war crimes trial. Here, the then Prime Minister Tojo Hideki and a few hundred people were executed in this trial. Okay. And the rest of the history was very interesting because of the Cold War. American plan, when they occupied Japan, they tried to change Japan into an agricultural country, very peaceful agricultural country. Americans say that, we will turn Japan into a country like Switzerland or countries like New Zealand, where I am living, okay? Which means no heavy industry, but only farming. And of course, Japan, we will protect Japan from any invading forces. That was American plan, initially. However, as the world, soon after the Second World War, very quickly, world was moving to Cold War, and also Korean War. Only 5 years later, after the end of the Second World War, the Korean War broke out, and the communist forces in North Korea, supported by Russia, the Soviet Union, and China, they were invading, so Americans had to get involved, and some 16 countries in the world, they sent troops to support South Korea. Now, in this process, Japan's economy rapidly started to develop, right? Because all the weapons and a lot of things that the Korean War needed were produced in Japan, and that's why after the war, Japan's economy very quickly developed, and Japan became, already by early 1980s, Japan became the second largest economy in the world, which is amazing. Okay? However, that was 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and partly 90s. The Japan was a very prosperous country. But after the 1990s, now things change again. Now, the rise of China. China until then was a very poor country, but by 1990s and especially 21st century, China now replaced Japan already as the second largest economy. So now China is the second largest economy and Japan dropped to third largest economy. and South Korea about 9th or 10th largest economy. But anyway, also now Japan felt the relative weakening of its economy and aging and decreasing population in the face of rising China. Okay? And also, North Korea had been developing nuclear weapons, and now Japan felt very much insecure. And can Japan trust Americans? Will Americans protect Japan? I believe so, because Japan is a very important country for America, or Western Europe. But anyway, within Japan, now it was changing. However, anyway, after the Second World War, especially 1970s, 80s, and 90s was a great time in East Asian relationship, because this is Hirohito. Now he got very old, and he personally apologized to Chinese and Koreans. And that's his son, who became emperor later. He also expressed his sorriness to not only China and Korea, but also Asia, because even Indonesia was occupied by Japan for nearly 3 years, and together with other Southeast Asian countries. And also this so-called sex slave thing, the Japanese prime ministers apologized and continues. Okay, but Shinzo Abe changed a lot, but he also had to apologize. Okay? However, as I said, this changing environment within Japan, there were more people who rose against this, trying to face the realities of today, that Japan should be more assertive. So Japan should move toward the right direction, the rightist direction. Okay, and that began sometime. I mean, that was always there, but they were rightists were very weak in 1960s and 70s, but they rose slowly, and by 1990s, now because of this relative weakness of Japan, they rose further. Okay? And meanwhile, this is in China today. In China, there are so many TV broadcasting companies, and every TV stations, they have to make this so-called anti-fascist drama. Now that anti-fascist drama means anti-Japan drama. So they always talk about this history, and the brave Chinese soldiers are, killing Japanese. And because there are so many TV companies in China, and they show this drama in a prime time, okay, when most people watch TV. So there was some interesting study about, in these dramas made in China, how many Japanese were killed. And someone calculated in each drama, and then they came out with what? Some more than 20 or 30 million Japanese soldiers were killed, okay, in each show, if you combine. However, China was also different in 1950s. In 1953, there were quite a number of Japanese children living in China. Why? Because after the war, Japanese could not escape, and many children were abandoned, and the Chinese raised them, and 1953, they were returning these Japanese children born in China to Japan. And this is a Japanese boat. The Japanese sent a big ship, and Chinese gave them gift for bicycle. Okay, so very interesting. China seems to be very nice in 1950. There are reasons, by the way, why. But later, China became very, very nationalistic, patriotic, and anti-Japan. Okay, so especially after Mr. Xi Jinping's rule, Chinese children are taught in a very patriotic way, and even these young ladies, they have this club called what, Shao Fen Hong, or small whatever, the red club, the communist, they support Communist Party. So these primary school children and young people, wherever. Okay? And also, South Korea also, there are many, because it is a democratic country, the populist political leaders, they always try to utilize anti-Japanese sentiment among Koreans. Okay? So politicians often provoke this, and same in Japan. Like a rightist politician like Shinzo Abe, they try to provoke anti-Korean, anti-Chinese sentiment among people. Okay? So and Koreans, they try to say that Koreans were enslaved by Japanese, and men as a worker and women as a sex slave, and so on. And often they are very much exaggerated. Okay? Even though it is true, but often this was very much exaggerated. And North Korea is even worse, because entire North Korea, the North Korean ideology was anti-US, anti-South Korea, and anti-Japan. So North Korea itself was built from the beginning with anti-Japan, anti-Americans, and of course anti-South Koreans. And if Japan teach their children the history, that how Japan invaded other Asian countries, how they colonized other countries, and so on, then Japanese children looking at it, learning that history, they are shocked, okay? And they feel very bad. And that's why these rightists, they believe they should change textbook and don't teach about anything negative about Japan's recent history. And also, Japanese pay more attention about themselves. And when they did, this is Hiroshima after the atomic bomb was dropped, entirely destroyed. Only this building, only walls survived. And also popular manga and animation, Japanese animation is so good, and they depict the ordinary people's life during the war, which generate a lot of sympathy. And if you watch this, this animation and manga, you can't just, you will drop a lot of tears, because these poor children and poor Japanese, this is true. I mean, they suffered. But when you emphasize only what Japanese people as a victim, that is a problematic. Okay? But anyway, that's what happened. So, in a sense, China, Korea, two Koreas, and Japan, all together, they claim that they are victims. Very interesting. In a sense, they are competing against each other. I'm a worse victim. But anyway, there are some philosophers who studied about this kind of phenomena. And one of them was, the Nietzsche, the famous German philosopher in the end of 19th century, early 20th century. And in his book, he talked about this French word, the ressentiment, which means resentment in English, but ressentiment is a more deeper kind of hatred against someone else or something. Okay? So, according to Nietzsche, this sentiment of ressentiment, this is an emotional attitude that entails negative stereotypes. If you hate someone, and especially if it's a group, then you tend to have negative stereotypes. Okay? And also, this is also jealousy as well. So negative sentiment provoked by the perception that other party enjoys an undeserved status position. And this is true also for individuals. When you think, individuals think, oh, that guy, he's so rich, but how did he make money? That, he sold drugs or he cheated other people. That's why he became rich. And I hate him. Okay, so that is again the sense of something. Okay, and so this is the same in countries like anti-Americanism in China or France and Russia. The anti-Americanism is everywhere. Okay, so this is also kind of sentiment. Now, sentiment is probably might be natural feeling of a human being. However, there's another philosopher, Max Scheler, another German philosopher, who studied about this sentiment, and he said, if you hate someone or something, actually, it is you who lose. If you imagine that if you hate someone, that someone, of course, will have an impact over your hatred. However, you are the worst victim of your hatred. Why? Because it is self-defeating, because your mind and your spirit cannot grow further. And he said, especially when this hatred is sustained for a long time, it hurts the person who hates far more than the other person who is hated. And also it enslaves the person who hates by preventing his or her emotional growth from progressing beyond the sense of pain. Amazing. So this is what hatred does on individuals and groups. So, can East Asian countries become friends as Europeans are today? Europeans were fighting against each other so many times throughout most of history, but today, at least Western Europeans, they formed the European Union and they they help each other, they live together peacefully. And now, this is a famous photo of in Germany it's called Kniefall, which means kneeling down. Then Prime Minister, the German Chancellor Willy Brandt, when he visited Poland, Poland is right by Germany, and Poland was the worst victim of the Nazi invasion of Europe. Poland was totally destroyed. And especially in Poland, in Warsaw, the capital city, there was a big Jewish ghetto, a Jewish town, and the Germans put Jewish people in a very small areas into ghetto, and eventually most of them were killed. Okay? So this was 1970, when Willy Brandt was visiting Poland. Without plan, it was not planned. He and his group was walking and in the city, and suddenly he turned his direction and came here and laid a big flower in front of this is a monument for the Jewish victims killed by Nazi Germany. Okay? But anyway, and today, of course, every year, the European leaders come there, including the German leaders, come there and they celebrate this. But anyway, when he did this, when he returned to Germany, what happened? Germans were angry. Because Germans had a similar idea that many Japanese had rightist had. Why we Japan had to fight? Because those damn Europeans, Westerners are conquering us Asians, and we had to fight Americans and other Westerners because we to protect Asia. Okay? So interesting idea. But Germans also had that kind of idea, and Germans were very unhappy. Okay? Nearly 50% of West Germans thought that this Kniffel was too much. However, 41% said it was appropriate. Okay? However, more important thing was that Willy Brandt was silent and didn't say anything. Here, he didn't say anything. However, so right after, all European newspapers in France and UK and Poland and Czechoslovakia and other countries, it was reported that he apologized and so on. Okay, so now this is an interesting part which shows the maturity of journalism in Europe in those days. The journalists interpreted that, and they said, they reported that he apologized. So what happened was, while Germans were not happy, Europeans were happy. Europeans thought that, oh, finally the Germans are apologizing. And now Germans begin to feel other Europeans, the French and the British and Polish and Czechoslovaks, they became nicer than before. Why? Because German Chancellor Willy Brandt apologized. Okay? So when Germans felt that, now German public opinion changed. And very soon, in election, nearly 1.5 years election, that Willy Brandt party had a landslide victory in Germany. Okay, so that's how the Europeans, the reconciliation came. However, in East Asia, that hasn't come yet. And as you saw, people are still very much against each other. However, I will show you some hopes. With globalization, a lot of Koreans and Chinese, Japanese students, they go to study abroad in each other's country. Now this is in China, so Korean girl and Japanese girl, and I don't know, probably she's also Korean or Japanese, or American, Asian American, and in their graduation, they celebrate their graduation in China. Okay? And this two cute Japanese girl who studied in Seoul, South Korea, and they are Hallyu fans for her, and they enjoy living in Seoul and have many South Korean friends. And also, because in Japan the population decreased, Japan needs more foreign workers, and you would know that recently many Indonesian young people go to Japan to work, especially ladies working in health sector, like helping old people and so on. So same in South Korea, many South Korean young people, the university graduates, when they cannot find a job in South Korea, they go to Japan. And actually, Japanese companies come to South Korea regularly and to recruit Koreans. And now this Korean girl is working for a Japanese company in Japan. Now, you saw the first photo I showed you in China, the angry Chinese were swarming into the street, protesting Japan. Okay? And that was 2012, and this is 2 years later. Still, this sentiment was terribly bad between Chinese and Japanese. Here, one Japanese student studying in Beijing, he was holding this. And what is this? This is China-Japan friendship, and this is a free hug. You know this movement. It was a movement for a while that someone to give you a free hug. Okay? So this brave Japanese boy, in Beijing, he was holding this, and not many people came. No one came. But this man, the Chinese man, with a sheepish smile in his face, he came and hugged this Japanese boy. But of course, hugging is not Chinese tradition, so he even doesn't know how to hug. But anyway, he gave him, the friendly sign. Young people can be very creative and more frank and more candid and more brave. And that's why it happened. And I think this exchange of a lot of young people in these countries eventually will bring peace and reconciliation. That's what I think. And now, when Japan started to pour this so-called Fukushima, the polluted water or treated water in China stopped importing Japanese the fish and so on, which badly hit the Japanese the fisheries industry. And also some Koreans, they demonstrated against Japan and so on. But here, this is interesting. They are Koreans, right? The Koreans from Korea. This is in front of the Japanese Diet, which is a parliament, and they say we want to recover friendly relationship between Korea and Japan, and so let's move forward to the future together. And this is it says mama. Yeah? So they are a group of mothers. Yeah? So mothers came to Japan, all the way to Japan from Korea to demonstrate that Korea and Japan should become friends. So things are changing. Okay. So I will conclude my lecture here. This nationalist politics after the Second World War in all three countries, they are very much based on anti-emotions of people. When people are tired and angry, politicians frequently utilize that feelings to divert that anger toward their other country. And that's what happened particularly in China and South Korea, North Korea, and to a certain degree in Japan. And this is what Nietzsche, I try to apply, this ressentiment and the victimhood sentiment. Hatred hurts the person who hates more than the other person who is hated. If we realize this, we can't hate anyone, because if I hate someone, it hurts me more. And I cannot become wiser, I cannot become more mature because of that sustained hatred. Okay? So anyway, of course, when people contact each other more as a tourism or study abroad and so on, that doesn't guarantee that they will become friends. However, it can bring much better relationship among the three countries. Okay, so I will conclude my lecture here, but I have just one more. Again, the Nietzsche. He was a very, very wise man, as you know, and he talked about insanity. And he said, in individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, insanity is the rule. Thank you very much. I will stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Changzoo. Actually, it gives us so much new insight. Actually, how about the relationship changes in East Asia countries, and how historical story in East Asia countries, and then we also learn about a moral message that hating is just give bad impact for each parties, and how young people actually have positive vibes to bring peace in the world. And then now I will open the floor for questions. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. And first, I want to ask Dr. Changzoo, do you prefer to answer all the questions together, or you want to answer one by one?
Maybe collect a few questions and then answer at once.
Oh, okay. Okay. So
at the same time.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Changzoo. Okay. For the student, if you have any question, please. Okay. Yeah. Already we have 5. Maybe we just take 2 first questions. Okay. Can you raise your hand together? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Mbaknya, okay, and Dipa. Dr. Changzoo, can you hear the voice from the student?
No, I don't hear anything. I hear you, but I don't hear the student.
Okay. Dipa, please repeat your question and
안녕하십니까. 제르멘 atmara dihadiri imnida. So Dr. Changzoo, you already explained about the writing system that is used to communicate as a substitute for speaking. Do you think this East Asian civilization habits is work for communicating to resolve conflict they have experienced in past?
Okay, the Miss Operator, can you collect the question? Because I can't hear the question well, so if you can just memo and later tell me when a few other students raise their question.
We will try another mic. Test. Hello, Dr. Changzoo? Can you hear me?
I hear quite badly, but I'm sure that that the moderator can hear, and she can tell me later what that question was.
Collect your.
So please go ahead and raise a question. Please go ahead and raise a question, and then I will ask the moderator once everybody finishes.
안녕하세요. 제이름은 atmara imnida. So Dr. Changzoo, you already explained about the writing system that is used to communicate as a substitute for speaking. Do you think this East Asian civilization habit is work for communicating to resolve conflict they have experienced in past? Thank you.
Terima kasih. Yeah. Okay, so the next question, we will collect several questions. Yeah.
Okay. 안녕하세요, Dr. Changzoo. 저의 이름은 Angela입니다. My question is the similarity of short names between China and Korea is an example of cultural similarities between East Asian countries, for example, like Huang in China and Huang in Korea? That's all my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Changzoo, do you clear about the question, or I still need to write it down?
Yes, can you tell me the question number 1 and question number 2 again?
Okay. Okay, the number 1, ask about, you already explained about the writing system that used to communicate as a substitute for speaking. Okay. And then, do you think this is Asian civilization is worth for communicating to resolve conflicts they have experienced in the past? So, is it effective to use the writing system?
Can you bring your mic a little bit close to your mouth? Because I can't hear you somehow very well.
Okay.
Or raise volume. Yeah.
Okay. So the first question is actually about does a writing system in the past is effective than speaking to resolve the conflict that they have?
Okay. So So what is then the question number two?
I forget about number two. Sorry. Oh, okay. Actually, the second question is about the three tribute or what is family name in the East Asia countries like Huang. Is it came from the past relationship between these countries, or is come from different story?
Okay. Well, I hope that I understood the question very well, but well, somehow the hearing is very difficult. But anyway, I'm very much impressed that the students speak Korean so well, and Terima, kasih. Okay, so writing system, yes, in all the days, the three countries, and also Vietnam as well, actually, the entire countries around China, they share the same writing system. But that's not unusual. Why? Because if you look at the European writing system, all European countries, they use only one writing system. Of course, Russians and Ukrainians, they use a Cyrillic alphabet, but Cyrillic alphabet and the Roman alphabet, they are very similar anyway, okay? Sharing writing system is very common in human history. And so these three countries, they share. However, in modern day, each country changed their the standard writing system. Even though Japan has been using Chinese character very much together with hiragana and katakana, their writing system, even still today, you see a lot of Chinese characters in Japanese newspaper, books, and so on. While in Korea, the policy was because Koreans have Hangul, so you really don't need the Chinese writing system. So they were abolished in formal education for a while, but as I said, up to 70% of all Korean vocabulary, the kata-kata Korea, they are based on Chinese writing system. So if you don't learn Chinese writing system, you don't understand the origin of the word. So that's the problem. But in China also, China itself changed the writing system because the old Chinese writing system was too complicated. And that is why among the three countries, Japan, Korea, China, literacy rate in China used to be the lowest because learning Chinese writing system is so difficult. Okay, so Chinese government, the Communist Party, changed and made it very simple. Okay, changing the complicated writing system into a very simple system. So the problem is now new generation Chinese, they can learn Chinese more easily. However, for Koreans and Chinese, or even Taiwanese, who are used to this old writing system, or as Chinese in Beijing, they say, oh, now it is much easier. But for us, no, it is more difficult. Many people prefer old, complicated writing system, okay? So anyway, in countries like North Korea, they don't use Chinese character at all, okay? And also Vietnam, as you know, the Vietnamese also adopted now alphabet, like Indonesia. So Chinese characters are all gone. So now new generation in Vietnam, they don't read. But you see Chinese writing when you visit a Buddhist temple or old buildings, everything is written in Chinese in Vietnam. Okay? So this writing system in the past, it brought people together, maybe. However, in today, the writing system is not necessarily bringing people together. But nevertheless, I believe it is good if Koreans and Japanese and Chinese and Vietnamese also learn Chinese writing system, because it is, first of all, it is a human culture. I mean, we human race invented that. It's not necessarily Chinese. It is like batik. It was invented by brilliant people of the ancestors of you Indonesians and Malaysians. So it is the entire human race culture. So I think we should not just disregard old writing system, but if we have time, we can learn like a foreign language, and it will be fun and it will help our brain development. And maybe if more Koreans and especially North Koreans also use Chinese writing system, when they travel to Japan, things will become easier. Okay, I don't know if I answered that question. Okay, but anyway, so that's what I would say. And then second, the family name question, very good. Family name, what Koreans today use and Japanese use, Chinese use, or Vietnamese use, this family name is very new for human race. I mean, Indonesians, your ancestors didn't have any family name except some very prominent families like Sultan family or so on, but otherwise no family. Indians didn't have any family name. Japanese didn't have a family name. So after Meiji Restoration, the Japanese government forced the people to have a family name. Same thing in Korea. Like my last name is Song, and in Korea you see a lot of Kim, Lee, Park. These are all the Koreans learned from China, because China was considered as a superior civilization. So they imitated the Chinese family names and they started to use, and now it became Korean family name. Okay? So anyway, even in Europe, ordinary people didn't have a family name. Why ordinary farmers? Why do you need a family name? Everyone knows you are John, you are Paul, that's enough. Why should you do this? Should you have Brown, John Brown, or John Smith? Okay, so this was probably very much the need of government. Because from government perspective, if every Indonesians have only few names without family name, then it will be very difficult for government to figure out like who is. If every boy's name is Samsu, then government will have a difficult time. So government, modern government, they want people to have a family name, and that's why in Korea and in Japan, with the establishment of new modern nation state, the government force people to have a family name. So that's what the Korean family name today and Japanese family name today are. Sorry, I don't know if I answered that question, but it was difficult to hear the question.
Actually, it answered all the questions.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Doctor. Okay, okay, Dr. Changzoo, can we have one question more?
Yes, please. Yeah, as much
okay.
as you wish. Yeah.
So the rest, sebelah sini, someone want to ask? Nggak ada. Okay, okay. The rest three, okay. Just raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Actually, wah, yang belakang ya, oke. Yang ini baju ungu, oke.
Good afternoon, Mr. Changzoo Song. I'm Vita Olejara from Geography major. As described, Japan a lot to China and Korea in the past. Japan has also apologized for what they have done. But as you said, their sincerities are suspected. Is there anything else that Japan did besides apologizing to get their diplomatic peace? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, thank you. I understand that question. Okay. So next.
Okay. Is it okay to plus one question or one enough?
Okay. Well, it depends on you. So
okay.
Shall I answer that question?
Okay. I think one is enough here because it's already night at your country.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay. It's okay. Just one question. Please, can you answer the questions?
Yes, sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much for everyone for good question. And yeah, so because this apology and acceptance of apology is very political now. It's the people who apologize, they do it for political reasons, of course, and also people who receive the apology, they also do it for their own political position, which means, as I said, in general, these three countries, they tend to believe that everyone is a victim. So Chinese, as a matter of fact, China is the worst victim of the war that Japan fought in China, because nearly 40 million Chinese were killed during the war, directly or indirectly, because of the war with Japan. So imagine 40 million people were killed. Okay? And also, Korea was a much smaller victim, but Korea was ruled much longer than by Japan than China. Korea was ruled by Japan nearly 40 years, and Taiwan even longer. But China only from 1930, so only about less than 20 years. But anyway, if we compare it with the Europeans, they have a very mature attitude, as I explained to you. When Willy Brandt knelt down in front of that in Warsaw, the Jewish monument, Europe already wanted to have a peace among them, because now this is a different time. Why Europeans should fight against each other? Because they are all same. They all share democracy, democratic values. They are becoming one market with capitalism, and European economy was growing, and and life was becoming much, much better. And that's why mature-minded Europeans, they created the environment in which Germans could genuinely feel sorry and apologize. Right? So two things here. Germans, after the war, they really felt sorry to their neighbors. So they were ready to apologize. But it also depends on the neighbors. When neighbors are not ready to sincerely accept that apology, then it doesn't work. And I think in Asia, in East Asia, the Japan is not 100% ready to apologize for some reasons, but particularly because Koreans and Chinese are not ready. And also, politicians in these countries, including Japan, they try to utilize this kind of sense of victimhood, and they emphasize on. And look at China, for example, the Xi Jinping, the leader's emphasis is 100 years of humiliation, which is true. If you look at Chinese history that way, for 100 years, China was harassed and exploited and invaded by European powers and Japanese powers. Okay, so 100 years of humiliation. Yes, yeah, that can be true historically. However, if you emphasize only that, that's only one side of history. How China became so wealthy today after 1980s. That's when China opened its door and Western factories and investment and technology entered into China. Of course, that was not to help China necessarily, but that's how global economy works. And thanks to that trade, China rose from very poor country to a very rich country and powerful country. Okay, so anyway, if we human beings understand others' perspective well, I think we can genuinely apologize and we can genuinely accept that apology. But that doesn't happen. And what does it mean is that I think people are still very immature. That's the only reason. Again, going back to Nietzsche, this kind of insanity, even Japanese who see themselves only as a victim, that's a problematic. And we should overcome it. And but unfortunately, in group, this kind of stupidity or insanity seems to be very, very strong. And that's why I really admire Indonesians. Indonesians are very wise people, I think. And where do I see it? Indonesia, from the beginning, it was not one nation state. They had to make a new modern nation state out of extremely diverse people, diverse in terms of ethnicity, race, religion, and language, and geography, and so on, and bringing them together, this great ideology of Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, this unity within this diversity. This is a great idea. Okay? So I wish that other people will also learn from other Asian countries and try to build a better world working together. Why? Because today we are living in the end of era of nation state. Nation state cannot do many things, cannot solve all the problems. The biggest problems we are facing today, climate, the climate change. Can one country challenge climate change? No, we have to work together. COVID-19. Can one country fight COVID-19? No way, unless we work together. And this globalization, the globalized world, we should put less emphasis on nation state, but we should put more emphasis on a global level of civil society. And if you understand this very grant that came from Eurasia Foundation, by the way, I met its founder, Mr. Satoyoshi, 2 weeks ago here in New Zealand. But anyway, so, you know, that's what they want. They want to teach people and help people to realize, go beyond patriotism and look at wider world and look at the world as a human race rather than small local, small communities. Of course, small communities are very important. We should not lose our identity, but we should be able to work together as same human being. Sorry, my answer was very lengthy.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Changzoo. Please give applause for Dr. Changzoo. Okay.
Thank you. Terima kasih. Yeah, thank you.
Before we end the class, actually we would like to give you a certificate as our gratitude for your willingness and kindness to share your knowledge to us. This is the certificate for you. Thank you very much, Dr.
Oh, beautiful.
Changzoo.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. This is very wonderful certificate. I will keep it.
Okay, thank you. I will send it to your email as well. And then actually your class will give positive knowledge and insight for our students. Thank you very much, Dr. Changzoo. Hope you are blessed with health and happiness. Hope we can see you in. Hope I can see you in person.
Yes, yeah, I will next year or sometime in the future. I really want to visit Indonesia again and enjoy the beautiful scenery, but also nasi goreng and delicious food. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Yeah. Changzoo Song. Yeah, okay. And also, please come to New Zealand. New Zealand is also a beautiful
want to
country.
Go there because I hear that in the New Zealand have a fresh air.
Huh? New Zealand?
Okay, I hear that New Zealand have a fresh air and a pretty nature.
Yes, yes, yeah. Like Indonesia, we have a beautiful nature as well. Beautiful beaches. And a lot of sheep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Changzoo. Okay. So this is the end of the class. Thank you very much for the attention and the what it is spirit ya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Changzoo. Have a nice day.
Oke, sampai bertemu lagi.
Oke, sampai bertemu kembali. Annyeonghaseyo.
Oke, annyeonghaseyo.
Kamsahamnida. Oke, already. Kenapa?